lunch hour. Thanks for getting the recording started. You will be able to see the recording and the slides after the presentation. I'm Janine. My pronouns are she, hers. I'm a program manager and a proud SPI State alum. I am on Kumi Island, otherwise known as San Diego, and I see a couple of you are too in the chat, which is always exciting. And I'll let Adi introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Adi, and my pronouns are my name and they and them. And I'm the program manager for SPI State, been on staff for almost 4.5 years, and good to see all of you today, or read all of you.
For some logistics, we'll reserve Q&A questions at the end for the Q&A. So please stay on, and please feel free to have any questions that you come up in the queue and box at the bottom of your window throughout the presentation. Questions in the chat will not be answered because likely we'll miss it. So please use the Q&A throughout the session. And again, the webinar is recorded, and so the slides and the recording will be made available to you after the webinar. Alex, next slide, please. Thanks. We've allotted an hour for today's webinar. And so first, we're going to share some background information on Women's Foundation California. Then we'll introduce you to the Dr. Beatriz Maria Solís Policy Institute, or SPI for short, and which was formerly known as the WPI, or Women's Policy Institute. We'll share some information about the structure of the program, what a year looks like in the fellowship. And then we're so lucky to have a current fellow, Isa, here with us today from the Criminal Justice Reform team, who's going to get to share about their experience as a fellow. And then we'll go over the application process. And last but not least, we'll end with the Q&A questions. So again, use the Q&A chat box all throughout today's session. Next slide, please. Oh, two more. Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So just some background. Women's Foundation California is a statewide publicly supported foundation dedicated to investing in, training, and connecting community leaders to advance gender, racial, and economic justice by centering the experience and expertise of the communities most impacted by systemic injustice. We're defined by a feminist, intersectional, multi-issue movement building approach. And our core values as an organization are community, justice, and well-being. We raise money to provide grants to community-led organizations, train community-based leaders through our renowned Solís Policy Institute, and foster a community of advocates, donor, policymakers, grant makers, academics, and many others through convenings to share knowledge and strengthen the social justice movement in California. Today, we'll focus on the train component of the Women's Foundation strategy, but if you have questions about other aspects of our work, please feel free to reach out. The foundation launched the Solís Policy Institute, then known as the Women's Policy Institute, in 2003. We spent more than 2 years conducting research, talking with stakeholders, and designing this nationally recognized program. In our research, we identified the need for community-based organizations and leaders to influence policy in order to ensure the progressive change was happening in California. The Solís Policy Institute, the flagship program of Women's Foundation California, will be starting the 21st year with the 2024 class and is widely recognized as one of the most successful policy advocacy training programs in the US.
So to date, SPI has yielded tremendous success. We have trained over 600 leaders in public policy since 2003. And 71 bills worked on by our fellows made it through both houses of the legislature onto the governor's desk. 51 bills have been signed into law. And 2 years ago, we changed our name to Dr. Beatriz Maria Solís Policy Institute, or SPI for short, in honor of the late Bea Solís and through a partnership with the California Endowment. Our new Solís Policy Institute celebrates Bea's commitment to championing the leadership of self-identifying women and girls of color and gender expansive folks across the state. And renaming the Institute honors her legacy and brings greater alignment to our gender inclusive work at the foundation. The fellows who participate in the Solís Policy Institute identify with a broad range of gender expressions and identities, and we are grateful that the Institute's new name is a more accurate reflection of our community and our values. Each year, 20 to 25 individuals are selected to participate in the program, and this year-long intensive fellowship teaches community-based leaders how to be effective advocates and create tangible policy changes for their communities. So why an institute? The SPI's theory of change rests on the belief that by bringing individuals who experience gender, racial, and economic injustice into the policy process, it is intentionally contributing to social justice movements by ensuring that the policy arena is representative of communities most impacted, which will change the culture and shape of policy. As an organization based on gender justice, we recognize that gender-based discrimination and violence disproportionately impacts transgender people. Our goals are to increase the number of non-binary and genderqueer people, cisgender and transgender women, and transgender men involved in the policy arena, and to increase the number of policies that reflect the needs and realities of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, immigrant communities, low-income communities, and rural communities. And you can review our website for more information on our transgender, gender variant, and intersex values. We aim to strengthen the leadership, advocacy, and public policy knowledge of our participants so that these skill sets can be applied to local, state, and national issues, and to support participants as they develop these skills. In so doing, we are also strengthening links between grassroots organizations and policymakers and encouraging lasting relationships among grassroots leaders within and between movements across California. Our social justice framework. SPI exists because our communities have been excluded from the policy process by design and because structural inequities are embedded in government. The program's primary objective is to train participants on how to create progressive policy changes within the current legislative system, while we also recognize that ultimately the policy process itself has to change. We highlight this because the current policy process is not always a welcoming place. The policy process is based on white, heterosexual, mostly cisgender male norms and discounts community voices. We strive to select trainers and speakers who reflect the diversity in the SPI and California, but there will be times, sometimes days, when you won't see your community's diversity reflected in the folks at the front of the room. We are also committed to changing that within and through SPI. The more of us with policy advocacy skills, the more of us who can train others.
After conducting a 10-year retrospective assessment of the SPI, we found that besides the SPI fellows trained and bills signed into law, our impact is much broader when one takes our alums' ongoing efforts to account. The success of dozens upon dozens of bills and local policy advocacy projects can be traced to the efforts of alums who've continued to work in policy advocacy long after their time with SPI. In fact, 76% of alums are still engaged in policy advocacy post-SPI. 75% of those alums reported greater advocacy engagement post-SPI, and 92% of these alums attribute this success to advocacy in SPI. Now, there are 5 things to know about SPI that are really important to understand about your experience and the application. First, the SPI is team-based. We place accepted applicants into teams of 4 or 5 people by issue area. So it's important that you come into SPI with an ability to work well with others, compromise, and work out differences quickly. The policy process is based on a very strict legislative timeline that will push you and your team to move your bill forward. Second, the SPI revolves around an experiential learning and a learning while doing approach. This is a training program, but the bill you choose is real. Once your team has chosen a bill, you and your teammates will do everything related to it. You'll find the author, work with the author's staff, conduct the research on your bill idea, and do all the lobbying. The bill belongs to your team and you own it. We know that fellows who feel they've learned the most were able to get their bill to the governor's desk. Their bill was movable. We want bills to move as far along in the legislative process as possible for your own learning. And remember that your team may choose a policy idea that is not a priority for you or your agency or organization. This program requires you to still work on your team's bills, so make sure that your agency knows that they must give you staff time to participate fully in SPI. Third, the SPI fosters individual leadership development. One of our priorities is to help our fellows grow their leadership skills, eliminate self-limiting thoughts and behaviors, step out of their comfort zone, and increase personal agency. Our alums overwhelmingly feel that they grew more confident as a result in their participation in SPI. Fourth, the SPI operates within an intersectional framework, meaning our cohorts engage in conversations about anti-oppressive policymaking, power, gender identities, and more. Our fellows are expected to participate in these conversations as we believe this is integral in creating policy that empowers our communities. We are committed to responding to and prioritizing Black, Indigenous, people of color, and trans leadership. So the 2024 year will especially focus on ensuring that we create policy that integrates an anti-racism and transgender justice lens. Fifth, the SPI emphasizes cross-movement building. One of the beauties of the SPI is that it brings together members of various social movements, many of which have been siloed for decades. Fellows take part in a fair team of inter-team work, which allows for each team to incorporate ideas grounded in other social justice perspectives. You should expect to learn, grow, and be pushed by your fellow SPIers. Cross-movement building is an integral part of the Women's Foundation strategy for building broader and more interconnected social justice networks in California. Knowing all that, we're going to go over the Institute schedule. So again, you'll get the slides after, so no need to frantically write this down, but just as an overview, the SPI includes 4 training retreats that are 2 to 4 days long. The first and last retreat are in person in Sacramento, and retreat 2 and 3 are online. The retreats include lectures and time to work on your bill and are essential to the fellows' learning. These retreats also give you a space to meet some of the most important players in the legislative process: advocates, staffers, legislative government employees, and lobbyists. And these retreats are exhausting. Do not plan on doing other work during these retreats and tell your supervisor you will not be able to do work during the retreats. Please apply only if you can make this commitment. And make sure that you check the retreat and seminar dates to make sure you're available to participate in each retreat for the entire retreat and each seminar for the entire seminar, and block those off in your calendar before you apply in case you're accepted into the program. We require transparency in your attendance as part of the interview process. Again, these dates are on our SPI application webpage, which also has the application, all FAQs, and we will reshare these slides. Depending on the class and the year, we may add a seminar or 2 depending on the needs of the class, and we'll provide you with as much advance notice as possible, as well as record them. And these, if it has been mentioned, these seminars are held virtually. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what does the year look like? Retreat 1 in October is where you will spend time to meet, to get to know each other, meet your team, get to know us, get to know your mentor. We'll discuss SPI, begin teaching you about the policy process, and focus on the legislative process. You'll meet with your team and experts in your issue area and decide on 2 to 3 policy projects. We'll also include sessions that reflect our intersectional values, such as examining dominant culture and transgender, gender variant, and intersex justice trainings. In retreat 2 in December, you'll finalize your policy project and begin to look for a potential author. You'll continue to integrate a gender, racial, and economic lens into your projects as necessary, and we'll continue with trainings that reflect our intersectional framework. Retreat 3 in March, you'll get ready for hearings and prepare you to do testimony, including a mock hearing. We'll also have a public speaking trainer who works with you on your testimony, and you'll also be working on your communications and advocacy strategies. Retreat 4 in May is where we prepare pitches for the legislative reception, networking tips, opportunities for in-person meetings at the Capitol, and how to prepare for the second house. Between each of the retreats, you'll have weekly team calls, be required to read materials, view supplemental lessons, and participate in 9 seminars, in addition to conducting significant team and individual work to advance your bill. Now, for the most exciting part of today's webinar, we'll get to hear from Isa Borgeson, a current SPI State Fellow on the Criminal Justice Reform Team, speak about their experience in the SPI. Isa, I'm going to read your bio and then pass it on to you. Isabella or Isa Borgeson, she, they, is a queer, mixed-race Filipina and white community organizer and poet from Oakland. Isa joined the Stop San Quentin Outbreak Coalition in 2020, calling for large-scale releases in response to COVID-19 outbreaks across California state prisons. In 2021, she was selected as Ella Baker Center's inaugural Outside Fellow for their Inside Outside Policy Fellowship Program, which supports systems impacted organizers through hands-on legislative training. Isa now serves as EBC's campaign manager, working on people-powered legislative campaigns and advocating for decarceration. They're a member of Critical Resistance Oakland chapter, a Solís Policy Institute 2023 Criminal Justice Fellow, and passionate about using poetry and storytelling as a tool for documenting resistance in their communities. Now, without further ado, take it away, Isa.
Nice. I wish I was off camera for the bio sharing. What's up, y'all? Do you want me to just like answer and talk about my experience a little bit? Okay, cool. Yeah, hey y'all. Sorry I can't see your faces, but excited to be in this shared virtual space with you. As was mentioned, my name is Isa and I use she, they pronouns, and I'm coming from Ella Baker Center and also part of the 2023 Criminal Justice Team, along with Iram Coronado from Milpa Collective, Sandra Johnson from Legal Aid at Work, Sue Kim from Uncommon Law, and Ivana Gonzalez from Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And just want to shout out my team because they're dope as fuck. And you know, I think the fellowship is a really difficult process. Like you get a lot of experience. Our bill is SB 474 by Senator Becker, which is also known as the Basics Act. The Basics Act stands for Basic Affordable Supplies for Incarcerated Californians. And the goal of the bill is just to reduce the markup on canteen items across all California state prisons. So for at least the past 15 years, CDCR has applied a 65% markup on all canteen items sold inside California state prisons. So when folks there's like a store at every yard in every prison where folks can buy food and stamps and some supplies, but also like hygiene products like toothpaste, like soap, like deodorant and things like that. And what CDCR does is they take that original price that they get from the vendor and they increase the price by 65%, so that someone who's making, say, like 8 cents an hour for their job as an incarcerated person, which is like a check of like $10 a month before restitution, so probably like $5 a month, can't actually afford to be able to buy like body wash for like $7 or be able to like supplement their meals for like what the meals that they're getting inside. And so that's been our campaign. Also just want to apologize in advance for all the barking dogs and ambulances in the background. I don't know what to do about it, but we will just bear through together, and maybe the panelists can let me know if you can't hear me and I can try to pause. Yeah, and I think folks asked me to talk a little bit about like favorite moments from the fellowship and also some challenging moments of the fellowship to date. I think many favorite moments, a lot has been like just building with my team. I think it's really important to spend a lot of time in like relationship building and trust building, because it's a very rigorous fellowship and there's going to be a lot of times where you're like committed to the legislative deadlines. And so you're pushing forward work. And so in the beginning of like the fellowship, we did some like in person, like kicking it with each other and trying to just like get to know each other more. Like we did a couple sessions together where we just like went to each other's homes or just like tried to like have some team building time that I think was really important, especially because it can just become like a very intense experience. So definitely building with my team. And then we organized this lobby day in order to try to get our bill past the first appropriations committee, where there had just been like this sub-5 hearing where CDCR was basically saying that like all the canteen supplies that incarcerated folks buy are like supplemental. They're not actually necessary for folks' survival. And they kind of painted folks inside who use the canteen as like bougie, of like, oh, these are just folks who like already have enough like soap and like hygiene supplies and food that they need. They just don't like what they're receiving. And so actually like they don't need the canteen supplies. They're just like being picky. And we got hella mad. And so Ivana's fellows at LSPC, shout out to Ivana and everybody at LSPC, they decided that they wanted to create a fish kit, which is like the supplies that you receive if you have like a $0 income within at CDCR. And also if you like go to a new prison, and this is supposed to last you like more than a month. And we dropped them off to every senator who we had a legislative visit with, and even folks like Republicans who we hadn't had a legislative visit with. And we were like, can you survive off of this for a month? Because most people don't even receive them for more than a month. And it was just like, it felt good to like put it in folks' faces. And then the senator ended up using one of like the fish kits, is what they're called, at the Capitol during his public safety testimony, and was like showing it off to folks. And that just felt like a really dope idea that like came from folks in community. I'd also say that like one of the goals of this bill for us was for it to be like a people power building campaign that like really involved the voices of folks inside and their loved ones. And so we've had like town halls where loved ones have spoken about their experience trying to like having to put off bills in order to send money to their loved ones inside so that they could have enough food to eat, or so that they could have basic access to hygiene supplies. And we also did a letter of support campaign where we got over, to date, I think we have over 1,700 letters from currently incarcerated folks across California state prisons in like support of the bill too. And I think that just like knowing that as a team, like that was one of our values, to be able to do that, and to like involve folks who were directly impacted in this bill and the campaign was really important. And then I think in terms of challenging moments, yeah, I think lots of things. It's a lot of work. And I think it's really important to have conversations with like your work about how much capacity it's going to be, and not just like logistical capacity of like how many hours of meetings there are, but also like how much homework there is, how much labor it takes. Like I think something I didn't realize, even though it's made abundantly clear by SPI, is that you're really the person for your bill. And I think I had come in with some legislative experience, mostly like in coalitions. And I was like, oh, like we are the coalition. We are like the folks. I like asked my mentor, I was like, so who's going to do our vote count for us? And like talk to the legislators to see like where our votes are before we take the bill up for a floor vote. And my mentor was like, you are the person who's doing all this work. It's your bill. And I was like, no, really? Like, that's like, yeah, it's just a lot. And I also think like making space for like the emotional work of what just can come up, of like what we're all acknowledging, and what I think this fellowship does a really good job of acknowledging, like the power dynamics in like these spaces, and how like white supremacist, transphobic, homophobic a lot of these spaces can be, and just being able to take care of each other, and take care of each other like during moments where folks are feeling like particularly imposter syndrome, or like trying to like fight against like not feeling dumb in these spaces, or people like being dismissive of us in these spaces. And I would say that that also takes a lot of like capacity and work to be like within yourself, but also like taking care of your team. And so I'd really have like transparent conversations with your organization, and maybe like double the hours that you think that this fellowship will take. Like it'll probably take double that to like be able to like care for yourself and be fully present. And then like just like logistically, our bill is also a very costly bill. It's the Appropriations Committee estimated that this bill is going to cost $37 million a year, which is, insert bullshit and insert eye roll here. But it's also difficult, like during the $30 billion budget deficit that California is going through. So like, I think it's cool that like we can have a lot of resources for SPI. A lot of like, I have my mentor for my SPI CJ team, but I also like the people who come in, I like ask them, can you give me advice? Can you share with me what we have to do? Because our bill is at high risk for veto because of how much it costs. And so like on Friday, we're going to do like a strategy session with a lot of those mentor folks and a lot of folks that we've met through the SPI process to like, what do we need to do between now and September to make it like incredibly embarrassing for the governor to veto our bill. And yeah, I think just like being able to like gather in those moments, but that's obviously challenging to be thinking like we're doing all this work and it may be out of our control because the bill just costs a lot of money. Anything else y'all want me to talk about? I feel like I probably went more than 5 minutes.
I think that was great, Issa. Thank you so much. And yeah, Issa will stay on until the end of the call for Q&A. So again, please drop any questions you have in the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end. I know some are getting answered already, but we'll save the rest for the end of the webinar. And thank you so much. That was great. I saw you getting a lot of love and like emoji reacts during that share. Alex, could you please pull up the slide again? Yes, Issa and the whole team is fire. Yes. Awesome. So continuing the presentation. So who is eligible? So again, SPI accepts non-binary and genderqueer people, cisgender and transgender women, and transgender men. And while we work hard to make sure that correct pronouns are used by fellows, trainers, and policymakers, we often can't control when someone uses incorrect pronouns for someone else. Recognizing that no place is 100% safe, we are striving for a brave space that is welcoming and affirming to all, and that has procedures in place for when harm occurs. We accept individuals living or working in any part of California. So this is a California-based fellowship, and working in a community-based or nonprofit setting with the full support of their employer and or supervisor. If you're not currently employed by a community-based or nonprofit organization, please email the SPI program after this to seek advice about your eligibility. If you are planning on going to school or know you will change jobs during the SPI year, this will not be a good year to apply. As part of your application, you will be asked to agree to a full list of participation requirements, and your supervisor will also be asked to sign. Do yourself, the program, and your organization a favor and don't underplay those requirements. Cost of the fellowship. So thanks to the generous support of many funders, the fellowship is free as it is fully subsidized by Women's Foundation California. And at this time, as Janine mentioned, the first retreat is being planned for in-person. Retreats 2 and 3 are virtual on the Zoom platform. And the final retreat location will be in Sacramento. All of these in-person retreats take into consideration current trends and data on COVID-19 surges. And the program funds a mentor for each team, and each team is given stipends for costs related to work on their bill in between retreats as well. Lastly, if you have children, we provide childcare reimbursements to help cover the cost of childcare during the time that you will need to be at retreats. And that includes for virtual retreats as well. Next slide. So I'm going to go into the application process a bit more. So the online application form on SurveyMonkey Apply will direct you through a set of individual and organizational questions. You will also be prompted to upload a one-page resume and the applicant requirements agreement. And you can download both of those forms from the online application. You and your supervisor, again, must both initial each of the agreements and sign at the bottom. If you do not have access to a printer, we recommend going to a library or a local print shop or a FedEx. And if neither of those options work for you, please make sure to email us. One of the application tasks is an individual narrative. So that entails answering a series of questions that you can find in the application form on SurveyMonkey Apply. Please refer to the application instructions on SurveyMonkey Apply for more specifics. And there are two specific questions that I want to talk about. So there is a part in the individual narrative section where we ask you to include a paragraph from your supervisor describing why your participation in SPI will benefit your organization and employer. Please include the name, title, and email of the individual making the statement, and that will be written. And then we ask you to describe how you will manage participating in a process and system that is not always safe for individuals who have experienced trauma and/or oppression. So I'll talk about our issue areas for the year. So we aim to feature teams working to address racism, anti-Blackness, and cis heteropatriarchy through the following specific areas: criminal justice reform, reproductive health rights and justice, trauma services and prevention, and health and prosperity, which is a new issue area. You'll find the complete descriptions of these issue areas on our SPI state application webpage, which is on the Women's Foundation California's website. Notice under each issue area, there are sub-issues. If you go onto our website, you'll notice that in order for a team to be able to create and work on a bill, they need to have a common interest within the sub-issues. For instance, a previous trauma services and prevention team worked on housing protections for survivors. In this case, housing rights is a sub-issue under trauma services and prevention. In order to take an applicant who works on trauma services and prevention in the program, we would need 4 other applicants who also work on that issue. So forward the information about the SPI to people who work on similar issues as you.
What makes a strong candidate? There is a selection committee that convenes in August to decide on finalists. Fellows will be selected through a competitive application process, and we'll select approximately 20 fellows in total. Applicants will be contacted by email by August 23rd to inform them of the committee's decision. Successful individual applicants will possess a deep content knowledge, which can be lived, learned, or from work, an ability to get along with others, how participating in the SPI will increase the policy advocacy work at your organization or in your community, a commitment to learning and full participation, and lastly, full support of your employer during and between retreats. Teams of 5 will have diversity of experience and geographic representation, diversity of backgrounds. This includes age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, etc., and similar policy interests within each primary issue. And we'd like to conclude by reminding you that we take many factors into consideration when selecting the fellows of each cohort. And so if you're not admitted this year, please try again next year. And we strongly encourage 2nd and 3rd applications. I can share personally that I didn't get it the first time, and then I applied the 2nd time and I did get it. So it's not something against you if you choose to reapply. And I'll pass it on to Adi as we get into our Q&A section.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for sticking with us so far. I'm gonna go through the Q&A and first just gonna go through 2 of the questions that were answered earlier just to make sure everyone saw. So the first question was, where are each of the in-person retreats going to be held? They'll both be held in Sacramento. Historically, all of SPI states in-person retreats are held in Sacramento to be close to the capital. And there was another question about if we would learn how to schedule meetings with legislators. And yes, so all of the retreats and the seminars in between retreats are catered to trainings that help you follow along the process of where the legislative calendar is. So you'll learn how to pitch directly from people who actually work in the legislature and also from alums who have experience and can share tips with you on how to best go about scheduling meetings. All right, so I'm going to go through and see what might be helpful. Okay, so first question, in the past, have fellows been working on other bills through their organizations while they're also working on bills as part of the fellowship? If so, how have they navigated any potential conflict of interest? Yeah, so we do have fellows who lead other bills as part of their organizations while being in the fellowship. We haven't had problems with conflict of interest, at least in the 4.5 years that I've been on. I'm not sure if Isa or Janine have any experience with this.
I mean, I can share because I was working on legislation at my job separate. There's no conflict. I mean, unless your bills are the opposite, which I don't think is the case, there's no conflict. And actually, it can be helpful when you're meeting with legislators, especially ones who maybe are supporting one bill and not the other, as an opportunity to build that relationship or get them on your side. So unless they're complete opposites, I wouldn't worry too much about that. It would probably be a conversation with you and your organization and supervisor, though, because that would mean that you might have more lobbying hours, or that capacity wise that you might be spending more time in doing lobbying for two separate bills.
Thanks, Janine.
Yeah, I think agreed. I would just say that there's one person on my team whose organization didn't come on as like an official co-sponsor of the bill. And I think that was all good for us. Like, I think it was just like being able to communicate to your organization during their own policy planning process when you're having your separate policy planning process. And we transparently had like there was EBC like policy ideas that were like I was funneling into our SPI one of like, I feel like this might be a good bill specifically because this is a 1-year fellowship and I was thinking that we could pass this bill in a year. And so I think that there was just the transparent conversations. And then I think it's just like knowing that if your organization doesn't co-sponsor, it doesn't take any work off of your plate because you're still going to be working on this bill, even if their name isn't on the title. So it's the most ideal scenario if your organization's also co-sponsoring.
Thanks, Isa. The next question I'm going to answer is, I believe that your literature states that self-employed people are eligible to apply. Is that correct? And yes, that is correct. However, as we mentioned throughout the webinar, we prioritize people who are rooted in community and who will be able to take the learnings back to who they consult with. So we have had and accepted people who are self-employed and don't necessarily have a supervisor sign off on their form. But they're still like deeply rooted in an organization where they're taking those skills and helping their grassroots organizations or using the skills they're learning from the SPI in their consultant work. So as long as it's relevant and you have the expertise, then yeah, we're happy to receive your application. And please feel free to email us at the SPI email, which will be on the next slide if you want a little bit more one-on-one advice on that. Let's see. I'm going to answer this question. How many applicants do y'all usually get and how many get accepted? We, this year, probably going to accept about 20 to 25 people. And the applicants that we receive, the number really varies by year. It's hard to tell. Sometimes we get up to 100 applications. Sometimes we get about like 60 to 80. So we usually expect to receive about 60 to 90 applications per year. Okay. Let's see. I want to give Isa space to answer a question. It says, if you're comfortable answering, Isa, how much did you cut your hours back at EBC to make space for this fellowship?
Yes, so I entered the fellowship like around the same time that I received like a promotion at work, and so it was like also increasing hours. But I think historically for EBC, each of us staff takes on at least one legislative campaign and then one campaign outside of that. And so this became my legislative campaign. That was my priority this year. And I didn't get any other EBC bill, which was helpful for me. Like I had other EBs, like I run like a inside outside policy fellowship. I have like other work, but like in terms of like the probably like 25% of my job that goes towards like a people powered legislative campaign, this was my bill for that. And then I think I just needed to communicate to like my team. I think when I needed more space on the projects, I think usually it's like 10 hours, and I would say like try to get like 15 to 20 blocked off in your calendar if possible.
Thanks, Isa. Another question, do we learn about the legislative calendar and how to anticipate the advocacy or strategies needed for each step for the bills? Yeah, so at the first retreat, we go over basically the whole year. We go over what the legislative process actually looks like in depth so that you're able to anticipate, the kind of strategies that you'll need for the year. And again, the seminars, we also pace throughout the retreat so that we're giving you all the skills and trainings that you'll need, usually about a month before you actually need them. And so sometimes you're working on, and maybe like Isa can speak to this, maybe you're working on like research for your bill still, and then we're actually giving you a training on what the next step of the process is. So we're always trying to help you all with anticipating the advocacy that you'll need to do for your bill. See, Isa. Let's see. This is a good question. What is the likelihood of anyone who submits an application where their area of interest may not fit with everyone else is still accepted? Just thinking about how issues may still fit intersectionally. So, yeah, it's not unlikely. And what we also take into account in the application process is sometimes someone will apply for trauma services and prevention. And then as another mentor for like reproductive health rights and justice is starting to notice a theme in her interviews and who's applying, we might actually go through and recommend someone who applied for another issue area, like for trauma services and prevention, to apply or be considered for repro instead. And so we'll often actually ask folks if they're, able or like willing to be considered for another issue area. That does happen at least like once or twice every year. And yeah, but for the most part, mentors do try to have as much of like overlapping areas of interest for a team. Let's see. Would you recommend I apply for SPI if I'm doing school online and have more availability? Again, it depends. I would recommend emailing us more directly. We usually don't accept folks who are in school unless, again, their like focus is really rooted in the issue area, but feel free to email us about your situation. Let's see. Janine, do you want to answer the question about, can you talk about topics, issue areas of some of the bills run this year?
Yeah, I can. And we actually we can share after on our website, a running list of the different bills that we're working on. You heard from Isa's team about the amazing work that they're doing. I can share that the Repro Justice and Trauma Services team is working on AB 957, which is let me pull up to capture the correct name, but essentially it's allowing minors to be able to change, it's protecting transgender youth to be able to change their name. And so that bill right now is left the assembly is now in the Senate. Our econ security team is working on a bill to get rid of work requirements for young parents or teen parents who are receiving CalWORKs, and so that they could be able to still receive necessary aid and allowing schooling to be considered part of their work so they can finish their high school degree or their GED. And then the last community health team is working around drug prevention and working on ensuring that youth can get access to how to intervene if someone they know is an overdose or different ways to do drug prevention. Sorry, y'all. But and I would encourage you all to check our social media, our Instagram. We've highlighted the different bills, and we also have all our past policy bills on our website, so you can learn more about last year's team and the teams before that. You probably may have worked on or heard of a bill and not knowing that it's an SPI related bill.
Thanks, Janine. The bill number for TGI Youth is AB 957. And that was one of the questions. And just to confirm with you all, we still have about 8 minutes, so I think we'll be able to get through the questions, but the questions we don't get to, we'll be sending a follow-up email with written answers to everyone who registered, as well as the slides and the recording. So we will answer all the questions, whether now or via email and a follow-up. There's a question about if organizations of fellows receive any funding in the duration of the fellowship. So yeah, we've had fellows apply from organizations who are already grant partners of ours. And then sometimes what does happen if after a fellow becomes, or after someone becomes a fellow, and if they're coming from an organization we haven't partnered with before, and if they're aligned with the grant making team's values, then we will give funding, but we don't necessarily give funding just because someone is a fellow. And our grant making team doesn't do like a application process to be considered for grants. So it's really if there's values alignment, but we do have a number of organizations who have received grants from us or who have become grant partners because we simply didn't know about the organization before we had a fellow in the program. So hopefully that answers the question. There's a question about if we cover elder care costs for folks who may not have children but care for elders. Yes, in the past we have given stipends. And so I think it would really depend on what the situation is. We do have a daily limit for how much we provide for childcare. So I imagine we'd also have some sort of limit for elder care, but we do try our best to accommodate all of our fellows and make sure that they can participate in the retreats as possible. I like this question. I don't know, Issa, not to put you on the spot, but there's a question about what the voting process is to agree on a bill idea. Or Janine as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my experience with it. I think for us, my advice is to have like a Google Doc or an email thread or something where you're sharing ideas before the first retreat, because at the first retreat, it's like a space where you can, you'll have more ideas come up for potential bill things, but it's also like a space to refine those. And then you're meeting with a lot of our mentor, hooked us up with public safety staff members, folks from ledge offices and things like that. And so if you have a list of bill ideas, even if it's a preliminary list, you can ask them about those bills and see which ones they think are a good idea or too far out of reach, or they'd be interested in even potentially authoring. So I definitely suggest doing some of that work before the retreat, even before y'all meet each other. For us, the process was we all had a Google Doc, and we came in and we added ideas, and we tried to add at least 2 to 3 ideas per member of our little team. And then at the first retreat, we had time to talk about it and think about what types of work we were trying to do, what were our goals, and then also align that with SPI's goals and SPI's parameters and container of this being a 1-year bill, and like, of course it could take 2 years, but like really wanting to make sure that like the bill that we were focused, I guess that won't really matter to y'all because you're all coming in at the second year of a 2-year cycle. So you have to do a 1-year bill. But for us, we were at the beginning of a 2-year cycle. So we could have done a 2-year bill, but we wanted to try to keep it within the container of the fellowship. And then from the first retreat, we picked like our top 4 bills, and we split into research teams where there was at least 2 to 3 people who were like having conversations with like movement partners, with folks who would be directly impacted by our bill ideas, and also just doing research of like prior bill ideas, things like that. I think SPI has like a policy proposal analysis that like you have to do for like your top bill, but we did that for all of our top 4 or 5 bills to like as part of like the way that we were filling out our research. And then from there we like voted for like our top 2, and then for our top 2 we did like a secondary set of like research and started to do preliminary conversations to try to find an author, and then we selected. But I think it's different per organization, or per team, and also how your mentor is. But it felt very similar to like, that feels very aligned with EBC's process. And that's also probably because Emily, who's one of our co-program directors, was like a longtime SPI CJ team mentor. So yeah.
Thank you, Isa. There's a question: when looking at the application website, I saw that the application to the criminal justice reform team is by invitation only. Have invitees already been selected? Is there a way to still submit interest with this team? Yeah, so we are going to have that issue area this year. For the most part, the invitees have already been selected. And if we decide to open it up, it will likely be also through folks who are already in our network. So we don't usually do that, but this year we're trying it out just to see how it goes. We did it about 7 years ago as well, also with this team or issue area.
Adi, I can actually answer that question around, do the issue areas have to align with the work we do with our organization, or could it be different? It can be different in the sense that I, for example, was working at an immigrant refugee rights organization and was on the repro justice team, right? And so I think that's what's so great about SPI and important with your team, is communicating, is really like remembering that these issues are all intersectional and are all impacting people from different backgrounds. And so when you're talking about health and prosperity work, there are going to be different subcategories, I'm sure, with your team. And that's why the brainstorming session is so important. I think with that, you know, the application gives you an opportunity, right? We're not just looking for applicants who are doing this in their like 9 to 5 or their job, but you, I'm sure, all have lived experiences that maybe are different than your job, or you volunteered with other organizations that are different than your job. That's all part of what we're looking at. And things that you can bring into the work as you think through the issue area and subcategory. So, I mean, that's given that your organization is supportive of you. If your organization is supportive of you, maybe not doing, again, like an issue area that's so specific to your organization. That was like mine. I think that's the biggest thing, to have that conversation with your supervisor. If you are interested in a team that you have a lot of personal experience in, is making sure that your supervisor is okay with you pursuing it. In my case, we were, because I was still going to get all the tools that then I could work on the other bill that we were working on. So I think I wouldn't let the issue areas discourage anyone from applying, because they're more intersectional that maybe you realize as when you're applying. And that if you get a chance to look at our previous bills, you'll see no one bill fits in a really specific bucket. Right, like arguably Issa's team's bill could also be economic security, right, as it's trying to address the inequities that are being faced by folks incarcerated. And so that's the long version of saying it doesn't necessarily have to align with your work.
Thanks, Janine. And the last question, is it likely that similar bills will be repeated? Yeah, I have not seen that happen. Sometimes if there is a bill, we have had, I don't know if you all know about SB 24, but we had multiple teams take on iterations of that bill before WFC actually took on that bill and hired folks to take that on. And so that's the only case I've seen where there's been a bill that's had a few different iterations of teams. But for the most part, Isa, did you want to share something?
Oh, I didn't want to cut you off, but I can add.
Yeah.
Yeah, our bill for 474 was like original idea came from a campaign called 555 that was about eliminating eliminating the calls, the price for phone calls inside county jails and also for the canteens, and that bill got vetoed by the governor, and then they brought it back and last year passed a version of the bill that was specific to California state prisons, and then like we went to that office and now we're doing part of that. So it's definitely in the legacy of a SPI passed bill for us.
Thanks, Isa. Okay, I think we should just go to the next slide, the last slide. So I see people are going off. So the entire application, including the required attachments signed by your supervisor and yourself, must be completed and submitted online by Wednesday, July 19th at 5 p.m. Once you complete and submit the application, you will receive an email confirmation of receipt. And interviews are going to be held July 31st through August 11th. Not every applicant will be interviewed, and all decisions will be released no later than August 23rd. We encourage your application, even if you don't have policy experience or even if you've never considered entering the policy field. And again, lastly, if you have any questions about the SPI, please refer to our FAQ, which is on the foundation's webpage, or contact us by email at spi@womensfoundca.org, and someone will get back to you. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Isa.
Thanks, y'all. Good luck applying.
Mm-hmm.